Caiaphas and Annas, names that once made Jerusalem tremble. As high priests, they controlled life and death, wealth and poverty. With a single command, they sent Jesus to the cross. But something followed them home from Golgotha that day. Something that waited, watched, and eventually claimed them in ways so shocking, ancient scribes struggled to record the details. What horrible deaths awaited these men who thought they'd silenced God? Their final moments will make you realize how God decides his own timing to punish the sins. Think about this. The most powerful man in Jerusalem wasn't even wearing the fancy robes everyone bowed to. It was Annas working from the shadows, pulling strings that made everyone dance. While others came and went, Annas stayed, building something no one had seen before. A family empire that controlled everything holy. Annas first became high priest around 6 AD. Rome eventually removed him from the official title. But that didn't stop him. Not even close. Instead, he did something clever. He made sure 5 of his sons became high priests one after another. Then came his master stroke, installing his son-in-law Caiaphas in the position. Caiaphas would go on to hold the title longer than anyone else in that era. The official power is nothing compared to the real power. Annas might have told his family as they gathered in their luxurious home paid for by temple coins. Every pilgrim who came to Jerusalem felt the grip of Annas and his family. See, the temple wasn't just a place of worship, it was their personal business. When you arrived to honor God, you couldn't use regular money. No, you needed special temple coins. And guess who controlled the money changers? Annas's family. They set the exchange rates, skimming profits with every transaction. Need a spotless lamb for sacrifice? We have those too, for just 5 times what they're worth in the market. Their plan was perfect. People had to worship. The law required it. And every prayer, every offering, every sacrifice meant more gold in their coffers. While regular families struggled to afford even the smallest dove, Rome didn't mind this arrangement one bit. Keep the peace, collect the taxes, maintain control. That was all they asked, and Annas delivered. As long as there was no trouble, Rome let the high priests handle their own affairs. It was a perfect system for those at the top. Then one day, a carpenter from Galilee walked into their temple. Jesus didn't just teach, he acted. When he saw the money changers and animal sellers, something blazed in his eyes. Tables flipped, coins scattered, animals ran free. "My house shall be called a house of prayer," Jesus shouted for all to hear. "But you have made it a den of thieves." We can almost see Annas pacing in his chamber when he heard the news. This wasn't just about money, though. That was bad enough. This Galilean had challenged their authority in front of everyone. Worse, people were listening to him, following him, believing him. When someone threatens both your money and your power, there's only one solution: get rid of them permanently. Annas and Caiaphas began plotting. They needed to silence Jesus, but carefully. Too many people were watching. They needed a perfect plan that would protect their position while eliminating the threat. They thought they had found it. A secret trial, false witnesses, a quick execution, problem solved. But here's where they made their first terrible mistake. They didn't understand who they were really fighting against. They thought they were silencing a troublemaking teacher. Instead, they were about to set in motion events that would not only destroy their family empire, but lead to their own horrifying ends. Consider these priests' decision for a moment before we reveal their terrible deaths for condemning Jesus. Power and wealth were more important to Annas and Caiaphas than seeing that God's Son was standing directly in front of them. Leave a comment below with the phrase "God defends the innocent" if you have ever felt God's protection, even while influential people opposed you. Every one of your remarks will be recalled in our prayers, just as God did after Jesus died on the cross. Perhaps someone who is being persecuted today needs to hear your story of God's protection. God has protected his followers throughout history, but he has also made sure that those who oppose his will are held accountable. And Caiaphas and Annas had to learn this lesson the hard way. Their ultimate verdict was more than simply a political embarrassment. What happened next shows how God's justice eventually finds those who reject his Son. Have you ever wondered what really happened when Jesus faced his accusers in that dark midnight hour? The trial that would change history broke nearly every Jewish law on the books. We're going to take you into that room where Annas and Caiaphas thought no one was watching. Jewish law was crystal clear. Trials could only happen during daylight hours. Never at night. Never during festivals. Always with proper defense. Always with valid witnesses. But Annas and Caiaphas didn't care about rules. They wanted results. Picture this. Jesus is dragged through Jerusalem's silent streets to the high priest's house. The chamber glows with oil lamps as members of the Sanhedrin gather, their faces half hidden in shadow. No formal charges, no legal representative, just powerful men ready to pass judgment in the dead of night. "Bring in the witnesses," Caiaphas orders, his voice sharp with authority. One by one, men step forward with stories about Jesus. But something unexpected happens. Their testimonies don't match. Jewish law required at least 2 matching witnesses for a death sentence. As each new witness speaks, frustration grows on Caiaphas's face. He said he would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. One claims, no, he said something about a temple not made with hands. Another contradicts. Through it all, Jesus stands silent. He doesn't defend himself. Don't argue. Doesn't plead. His silence unnerves them more than any shouting could. We can almost see Caiaphas pacing now, his carefully planned trial crumbling around him. Dawn approaches. People will soon fill Jerusalem streets. Time is running out. In desperation, he breaks another sacred law. He directly questions the accused. Standing before Jesus, Caiaphas's voice rises. "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." The room falls deadly quiet. Even the flickering lamps seem to still. Jesus looks directly at his accuser and speaks words that seal his fate. "I am, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Gasps fill the room. Everyone there knows exactly what Jesus means. He's claiming to be God himself. He's quoting Daniel's prophecy about the divine Messiah. Caiaphas tears his robes, a dramatic gesture showing horror at blasphemy. What do we need witnesses for? You have heard his blasphemy. What these priests don't realize is that in their rush to condemn Jesus, they're actually fulfilling ancient prophecies about how the Messiah would be rejected. Isaiah had written centuries before. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. The greatest irony, weeks later, Peter would stand in the very same city, possibly before some of the same men, pointing an accusing finger at those who had condemned Jesus. "You killed the author of life." Peter boldly declares in Acts 3:15, "But God raised him from the dead." The priests thought crucifixion would end their problem. They thought nails and wood and a sealed tomb would silence this Galilean forever. But something strange started happening the moment Jesus died. Events that would send chills through Annas and Caiaphas's powerful bones. What goes through the minds of powerful men when nature itself seems to protest their actions? From a safe distance, Caiaphas and Annas watched as Jesus hung on the cross. The problem that had threatened their power was dying before their eyes. They had won. Or so they thought. Then at noon, when the sun should have been brightest, darkness fell across the land. Not just clouds or a quick shadow, but a thick, heavy darkness that lasted 3 hours. People in the streets stopped and pointed at the sky. In the temple, priests looked at each other with questions in their eyes. "It's just a dust storm," Caiaphas might have assured those around him, but his voice probably shook as he said it. Then Jesus cried out one last time and died. At that exact moment, the ground beneath Jerusalem began to tremble. Not a small shake, but a violent earthquake that sent people running into the streets. Stones cracked, buildings swayed. Something was happening that no one could control. Inside the temple, the massive curtain, 60 feet tall and as thick as a man's hand, suddenly tore in two from top to bottom. This wasn't just any curtain. This was the sacred veil that separated the Holy of Holies where only Caiaphas could enter once a year. This was the barrier that kept God separate from the people. And now it lay in ruins. A temple worker would have run to Caiaphas with the news, breathless and pale. The veil, it just tore itself apart. This was personal. Now that veil represented their special access to God. It was the very thing that made them necessary. Without it, what power did they have? But the strangest reports were yet to come. As night fell, rumors spread through Jerusalem. People who had been dead, righteous men and women known to many, were seen walking in the streets. Matthew 27:52-53 tells us the tombs broke open, and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life and appeared to many people. Imagine the whispers reaching Annas and Caiaphas, dead people walking and talking. This was beyond anything they had prepared for. Their control was slipping away with each new supernatural sign. In panic, they rushed to Pilate. "Sir, we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days, I will rise again. Give the order to secure the tomb until the 3rd day.'" Pilate agreed. Guards were posted, a Roman seal placed on the stone. No one could get in or out without everyone knowing. Yet, when Sunday morning came, those same guards burst into Caiaphas's home, shaking with fear. The stone was moved, the tomb empty. They spoke of blinding light and powerful beings that made them fall down like dead men. Caiaphas didn't hesitate. He pulled out a heavy bag of silver coins. "Take this money," he ordered, pressing it into their hands. "Tell everyone his disciples came during the night and stole the body while you were sleeping." The guards took the money. The lie spread, but no amount of silver could stop what was coming next. How quickly can a powerful family lose everything they've built? For Annas and Caiaphas, the answer was faster than anyone could have imagined. Just 7 weeks after they thought they'd solved their Jesus problem, Jerusalem exploded with a new movement. At Pentecost, the disciples who once hid in fear now stood boldly in temple courts proclaiming the resurrection. Peter, the same man who had denied Jesus, now preached without fear. People listened by the thousands. "These men are speaking about the mighty works of God in our own languages," people exclaimed as they gathered around the apostles. When a man who couldn't walk was suddenly healed right at the temple entrance, huge crowds gathered to see this miracle. People were amazed as he jumped and danced, praising God. All eyes turned to Peter and John. It is Jesus' name and the faith that comes through him that has completely healed this man. Peter announced for all to hear. Caiaphas ordered guards to arrest them, thinking a night in prison would silence these troublemakers. But the next day, standing before the same council that had condemned Jesus, Peter pointed directly at them. "It is by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, but whom God raised from the dead, that this man stands before you healed." The priests were stunned. These were ordinary, uneducated men speaking with power that couldn't be denied. The healed man stood right there as living proof. They had no choice but to let them go with just a warning. But the warnings didn't work. Neither did the beatings that followed. Each time the apostles were arrested, they went right back to preaching. When they were flogged, they left rejoicing because they had been counted worthy of suffering disgrace for the name. Worst of all for Annas and Caiaphas, the movement kept growing. Acts 6:7 tells us that the number of disciples in Jerusalem increased rapidly, and a large number of priests became obedient to the faith. Their own priests were defecting. Rome started asking uncomfortable questions. Pilate had already sent reports about the crucifixion and the strange events that followed. Now there were thousands of Jews gathering daily, all talking about a risen king. To Roman ears, this sounded like rebellion brewing. Caiaphas had promised Rome one thing above all else: peace and control. Now both were slipping away. His position grew shakier with each passing month. Then in AD 36, 18 years after taking office, Caiaphas's world collapsed. Lucius Vitellius, the Roman governor of Syria, arrived in Jerusalem. He had seen enough. In one swift move, he stripped Caiaphas of his position as high priest. The mighty son-in-law of Annas was publicly humiliated. The man who had torn his robes in righteous anger now had his sacred garments taken from him. The man who had sat in judgment over others was now judged and found wanting. With Caiaphas gone, Rome tightened its grip. The Annas dynasty began to crumble. One by one, their special privileges disappeared. The family that had controlled Jerusalem's religious life for decades watched their power drain away. For Caiaphas, the final blow came when he was summoned to Rome to answer for his failures. He who once commanded others now traveled in chains, forced to explain himself to emperors who had no patience for failed puppets. But political disgrace was just the beginning of their troubles. What if your name became forever linked with a terrible end? For Annas and Caiaphas, that's exactly what happened. Stories of their deaths spread through early Christian communities like wildfire, told and retold as powerful examples of God's justice. Ancient Christian writings paint a gruesome picture of what happened to Annas. According to these accounts, the once powerful priest was arrested and bound for transport to Rome. But this wasn't just any binding. His captors wrapped him in wet oxhide, a material known to shrink dramatically as it dries. As the journey progressed and the hot sun beat down, the hide began to tighten. Slowly, hour by hour, the shrinking leather squeezed tighter around Annas's body. First came pain, then crushing pressure that made breathing difficult. Those who recorded these stories described his final moments as ones of terrible suffering, his body eventually crushed by the very bonds that held him. The man who had once commanded Jerusalem's highest religious office died alone, far from home, in unimaginable agony. Caiaphas's end was different, but equally disturbing. Early traditions tell us that after losing his position and power, he fell into deep despair. The weight of what he had done, condemning an innocent man, perhaps even the Son of God, crushed his spirit. Some accounts say he wandered in misery for years before finally taking his own life, unable to escape the guilt that haunted him. These men condemned Jesus to die on a cross. Christians would tell each other, and look how God dealt with them in the end. These stories served a powerful purpose in early Christian communities. They showed that even the mightiest couldn't escape divine justice. No matter how powerful you were, your actions would eventually find you out. In 1990, archaeologists made a stunning discovery in Jerusalem, an ornate burial box with the name Joseph, son of Caiaphas, inscribed on it. Inside were the bones of a man in his 60s. This remarkable find confirmed that the biblical Caiaphas was indeed a real historical figure, adding weight to the accounts of his life and downfall. But the final judgment on these priests and all they stood for came in AD 70, exactly as Jesus had predicted. Roman legions surrounded Jerusalem. After a brutal siege that starved thousands, they broke through the walls. Soldiers stormed the temple, the very place where Annas and Caiaphas had once ruled. The Golden Temple, pride of the Jewish nation, burned until the gold melted between the stones. Roman soldiers tore the building apart stone by stone to get to the melted treasure. Not one stone was left on another, fulfilling Jesus' words. Exactly. The priestly families who had once lived in luxury lost everything. Their wealth, their status, their very way of life vanished in flames and blood. The sacrificial system they had controlled ended forever. The temple that had been their power base disappeared from the earth. The dynasty that Annas had built, that Caiaphas had fought to protect, all gone. Their names lived on, but not as they would have wished. Instead of being remembered as great religious leaders, they became cautionary tales of what happens when men fight against God's plans. But the most shocking thing about these men isn't how they died. It's what their lives accidentally accomplished. The story doesn't end with the deaths of Annas and Caiaphas. There was one more player in this divine drama, the Roman governor, who actually sealed Jesus' fate with a simple ritual. But what happens when the man who judges God's Son faces God's judgment himself? Pontius Pilate thought he could wash away his guilt, but no water on earth could cleanse what he had done. His nightmares grew more terrifying. His political career crumbled faster than Jerusalem's walls, and his final moments so shocking that ancient historians debated whether to even record them. Did you know his wife received supernatural warnings that still haunt readers today? Or that Pilate's body faced a fate so disturbing that people refused to let it rest in their lands? You won't believe what divine justice looks like when it finally catches up to the most infamous judge in history. Click the video appearing now to discover the bone-chilling conclusion that completes this remarkable story of power, guilt, and ultimate judgment. Without this final piece, you'll never understand how God's perfect justice works in this world and the next.